Hello and welcome to the Business Octopus, where we talk about all things sales, marketing and technology. I'm Aidan Collis, CRM and Marketing Automation Strategist at Relevate and all-around good guy. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Streten, CEO of Business Legal Lifecycle, here to talk about minimising your legal risks. Hello, welcome. How are you going, Jeremy?
Very well, thanks, Aidan. Thanks so much for having me.
No problems at all. I'm going to do something a little bit different in this episode. Today I'm going to ask you what's one of your hobbies or personal passions. What's something that you like to do on the weekend, say?
My weekends are sacrosanct to spend with my children and to read. So they're the two things that I love doing and I love spending time with. So we were just talking beforehand, I have a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old at the time of recording this. And actually, no, an 8-year-old. She just turned 8. I'm an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I love spending time with them on the weekend. And we play cricket, we go swimming and spending time with them. And I love to read and learn. So my mornings are spent reading and learning. And then the rest of the weekend, I try to allocate to them and spending time with them.
Fantastic. I'm sorry to spring that on you. We didn't talk about it beforehand. But,
That's all good.
No, I think it's always good to humanize. So, we were talking a little bit beforehand, and we're talking about obviously the legal risks and being a business owner. It's a complicated world out there. So, how does a business owner know if they have any risk?
Yeah, it's a great question, Avon. And I think that the first thing to remember is that all businesses have risks. Everyone has a risk in their business. So just because you don't know it doesn't mean that you don't have it. And one of the great things about the law, or probably not the great things, one of the most frustrating things as a lawyer, because my background is a lawyer, is that there are lots of unknown unknowns. So as a business owner, you don't know the risks that are out there because you don't know. You haven't done a law degree, you haven't been studying this stuff like lawyers have been. And so there's lots of risks out there that you just don't know about. And one of my big frustrations with the law is that lawyers are reactive. So that when there's a problem, we react to the problem rather than being proactive. And there's lots of reasons why people don't come to us beforehand as lawyers. But the main one is they just don't know that there's risks there. So we're about trying to help people to identify their legal risks before they arise so that they can be proactive in what they do rather than just reacting to problems when they come up.
Absolutely. I think, in thinking about that while you're talking, I was sort of saying, you open your eyes in the morning, you have a legal risk. Whether you run a business or not, like crossing the road the wrong way, give you, you can get as a jaywalking and all that sort of stuff. And, people think legal like crime and but there's so many different parts to law. It's, you got your tort law, your negligence law, all those sorts of things. So obviously with so many, I guess, things to follow and in my world, in the CRM world, I'm constantly dealing with customers and information, and there's been a huge thing around privacy. Since COVID, we've had thousands of emails hit your inbox every day. It can be a little bit confusing as to what's allowed, and then there's all these regional problems. California have got all their specific laws, GDPR, and that there's some nuances around that. You only collect the minimum necessary. What do people need to know in Australia about privacy?
Yeah, so I think that the thing about privacy is it's really, you've got to take a common sense approach to privacy. So, things like making sure people opt into emails, making sure that you're complying with the laws is actually really quite simple if you're sensible about it. If you're going and buying databases and sending out emails to a bunch of different people, then clearly you've got some risk. But if you're just dealing with customers and clients and people signing up to through your CRM and they're signing up on the website and there's proper consent, then that's fine. So I see privacy very much as a common sense matter. If there are, though, complications, if you are working into the US, like I work into the US and to Europe, and I work into Europe too, you've got to think about these laws and how they might apply and making sure that you get really specific advice to your circumstances. So, one of the things that I always say is that, what's right for me might not be right for your business or might not be right for anyone else. So you need to make sure that you're addressing it in a specific manner to your situation that actually works for you. And so you've got to be really conscious of what it is, taking a very common sense approach and not trying to, get one over people. I think one of the things that frustrates me the most in law is when people try to skirt around the edges of the law. And usually if they just took a common sense approach, they wouldn't have a problem.
I know I went to a conference once to learn about some legal stuff around contracts. It was a free one put on by the government. And one thing I remember the guy saying is, they were dealing with like a tender agreement or something. And then they called it something else that was some proposed idea to contract or something like that. And he basically said, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And it's amazing how many legal principles are actually quite common sense. Despite all the language and lingo and complex words and, things like promissory notes and juris non excusas, et cetera, Latin. It's the best of my legal knowledge I'm trying to surface here. But I think that, there's the government, whilst it's quite complicated, do try to simplify it in the Australian privacy principles. What's your understanding of that? And how does one find more info about that?
So, there's lots of great resources on the web, and the Australian government does give lots of information about the privacy principles. Generally, they apply to bigger companies as well, but it's a good practice to actually make sure that even small companies are aware of them and do comply with the rules around the Australian privacy principles. So, they're generally common sense. A lot of law is common sense, but there are some people who don't agree with that. So, I think that going through the privacy principles, there's lots of principles that if you just comply with what they're generally trying to do, then you're going to be fine. But knowing that the actual enforcement, the fines and generally that they're looking at the bigger companies for that. They're not looking at smaller people, unless you go and do an egregious breach of what the rules say and you're deliberately trying to go around them. So I think once, as you said, the government, a lot of people criticize the government, and that's fine. I think that though in a legal sense, one of the things that I learned from doing my law degree 20 years ago when I did my law degree, showing my age, is that most of it is common sense. And if you just, you said before, if it looks like a duck, if it sounds like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. There's a lot of legal principles that are out there. And that's something that a lot of people need to remember in their dealings with the law. And the same is true with the privacy principles. Common sense, generally, you'll find yourself okay.
Well, I've had conversations with people before, and they said they've, quoted the privacy principles to me, and they've said that it's something like 3 million turnover and above, you start getting fines. We're less than that, so can you upload this data, this list that we downloaded or bought or something, and we want to send 20,000 emails out, tomorrow. And you start to have a think about that, and you go, hold on, that doesn't sound right. Would you want someone, just bursting into your house and start talking to you? There was no permission, and they go, oh, but it's all commercial contacts, or it's all companies, or it's all this and all that. And there's, I guess, the common sense from the human perspective, but also what people don't realize is that all the email service providers have to comply as well. So they're told that, well, this is your email platform, we're going to hold you responsible. So then they've got to put controls and things in place. Now, I guess, it's my job to try and build controls into a system that employees have to follow. But at the end of the day, sometimes you can get an employee with a notion of what they've got to do and how they do it. And they might go, well, I've got a KPI to get X amount of sales, so I'm going to go buy a list, download it, and then all of a sudden you're liable. Which it kind of stems into our next point of, what are the mistakes people make when they bring on employees?
Yeah.
I guess for that, in the second question, I guess it would be, how do we mitigate and manage that? But let's start on the first one. Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. So the thing to remember is when you're bringing on an employee, they are an extension of your company. So doing things like that means that you're responsible if they're an employee of yours. There's a thing called, and I don't like using legal terms too much, but I'll explain it after I say it. It's called vicarious liability. That's basically what it means is, as an employer, you're responsible for the actions of your employee. In my law firm, if my employee does something wrong, I'm responsible for that as their employer, unless they breach, it's fraudulent or it's in breach of an agreement. So probably the big ones around employees are around not defining their role, not defining the rules of their engagement. And if you've got salespeople and you don't want them doing that, then you need to tell them. Because if you don't have employee management policies, rules about what people can do, then people will make up their own mind. and they will do their own thing until someone tells them otherwise. So, as far as the biggest mistakes go, I'll talk about those in a moment, but the way to mitigate all of them is to have rules around what they can do. So things like you can't upload a database of people that haven't consented to our newsletters to go out. And on that point, Avon, you and I were just talking about before the call, that just from a business point of view, and I do a lot of business advice, it's not really the greatest idea to do that, because people just get annoyed at you, and then it diminishes your ranking on your emails. There's all those email rules out there that, like Gmail, starts to classify emails that are automatically junk and you don't even see them.
Reputation, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, reputation. And so it's just a bad idea to do that, and not be afraid for people that you do have if they unsubscribe, because that means they're not interested, or they're overwhelmed. And so I think that if as an employer, if you want to stop employees from doing that, rules are the best way to do it. Having written procedures out and guidelines about what people can and can't do, and then making sure that they're actually aware of it. So if you've got new employees, then you get them to read the rules when they start, but then you also get them to review them regularly, because otherwise people forget, people tell their own story. And then if you do have existing employees and you actually want to do the same thing, you want, when you introduce these rules, actually have them agree to them, and then review them every 6 months or so, just to make sure that everyone knows and understands them. Otherwise they forget, don't they?
And rules change, laws change, and maybe old thinking doesn't apply anymore. And sometimes first thing I think about, if I was to bake it into a system, I'd be thinking about how do I put validation rules so they can't enter that information, or they can't do a certain step unless it's been approved. And then you've got approval workflows and pop-ups, because there's so much information that you just don't know where to look, and you don't want to give someone a 600-page manual before they start on their first day. So I think it needs to be quite practical at the same time. When you're talking before about that, vicarious liability, it made me think of when I was doing my one law unit. Is there was a case about a baggage handler, and he got fired, but he was still on the uniform, and someone asked him to take their bags, and so he took them home. And then obviously the bags went missing. So the poor couple or family or whoever it was sued the railroad, and they had to pay, because they said that, well, because he was in uniform, he was holding out as though he was an employee, that they were responsible. They don't even have to be your employee technically, I guess. A very complex and confusing landscape.
It is very complex. And I said before, common sense applies. People often think that fairness applies too. And what's fair may not actually apply, and what you may think is fair. So what you may think is fair might be different to the way that I think something's fair, that a judge might think is fair, and all the rest of it. And there's other complicating things that come into that kind of arrangement where, the courts look at whether or not that gentleman actually had any money or had any way to compensate these people. But then if they don't, then the employer becomes liable. So you need to have these rules set out, and then as much as you can, have policies and procedures, and have guideposts that stop people from being able to do the wrong thing if they do that down the track. And this is where common sense applies. But if you've got something where you think this could become a problem for you and your business, this is where you need to go and get advice. In the employee space, you can go to lawyers to do that. There are lots of great employment consultants out there as well that do a lot of this work and don't charge like lawyers and do a fabulous job. So these are the kind of areas where you need to have documented agreements, documented rules, things that will make sure that the person knows what they need to do and what their boundaries are in their job.
So it sounds like there's a bit of like an escalation of force, and there is a point at which it's getting a little bit too complicated. But I guess there's probably an underlining trend there is just having stuff written down, which kind of brings us to our next point, I guess, is contracts. How important are contracts, or is a handshake okay?
So this is it's actually one of the reasons I developed the life cycle, was my frustration over business owners being reactive. And so what generally happens is we start businesses, or we go into agreements, whether they're employees or with clients, and we go, okay, we'll just start working, especially in the beginning of the business, because you're so eager to get out there. You're so eager to start developing the business and starting to get clients and start making money. And what happens is you don't enter into an agreement. So you have in your mind what the rules are. The other side have in their mind what the rules are. And generally they'll be different. And if you don't have it documented, then that it might be fine for 6 months, might be fine for a year, it might be fine for 2 years. But at some point, something will change and there'll be some expectation changes. And if you don't have it written down, then it becomes very hard to work out what the agreement was to begin with. And so when you don't know what the agreement is to begin with, then people will try and define it. They might have emails going backwards and forwards. There might be a conversation. And what I always say to people is, it's all well and good at the beginning, but if you do have a dispute, and disputes are inevitable, like they happen in every relationship. If you can't come to a resolution and you want to go to court, what you think is fair will never be what the outcome of that court litigation is. So when a judge looks at a dispute, they go, you've got one side story on one side, you've got another side story on the other side, and they will always think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Right? Unless there's a document that says otherwise. So I think it's really important for people to understand that, it might take a little bit more time to get the contract done right. It's never going to cover every situation, but it should cover what the potential areas for disagreement are. In some senses, when I'm talking to my clients in the legal space, I talk about them being a disagreement. In other words, that they set out what happens if there's a disagreement between the parties. And so agreements, whether they're with employees or contracts with your clients or your customers, becomes very important that they define what everyone understands the relationship to be, and then gives a mechanism if that doesn't work out for the parties to resolve that dispute.
So it's almost like you're trying to explore all the problems first.
Yeah, and you're never ever going to get every single problem, but you want to have what you think the main problems will be, and then if there are other problems, how will they be dealt with? Just talking to a client, I don't do actual legal contract drafting anymore, but I was getting my team onto a contract for a client yesterday who's entering into a very large 6-figure contract, and he goes, "Oh, do I need a written contract?" And I was like, "Yes, you do."
Yeah.
And I won't go into what it is because it might be too specific, and I want to protect their privacy. But just to say that any agreement where you're doing something, you need to define that relationship, because things will change, and you want to make sure that you're covered of that in the future.
Yeah, I think there's people could think about all right, well, I'm going to do a lot of different things, or maybe I'm going to have a different contract here, different one there, different one there. And I guess, again, before we talked about that escalation, I'm assuming that, you probably have maybe some template contracts that cover pretty good stuff, up to a certain point. You might have a threshold and you go, right, this one's got to be custom and unique to that situation. So I guess, from everything we've spoken about, the law kind of threads through a number of different themes. And, as we're talking through everything, we're talking about risk, we're talking about emails, employees. I found it actually quite difficult to stay on that one line of questioning or comment, because automatically, we're talking about emails now, we're talking employees, and we're talking almost contracts at the same time. It's that thing that permeates through everything, and as you say, it is quite a life cycle. So I think it's been absolutely fantastic having you here today and talking about these things. And, we discussed a little bit before, if you're listening and you want to get onto the businesslegallifecycle.com, you can add on the back /the business octopus. So businesslifecycle.com/the business octopus. And you've got something special for our listeners, don't you?
Yeah, we do. And so as a thank you for being on, we have a 50% discount on our tests that people can take to identify their legal risks. So we have it's less than $100 normally. And for the listeners, it'll be about $47.50 for them to take the test. And they'll be able to identify what are their legal risks, what are their blind spots. We've also got on that site lots of information, because, when we talked before about there's all these different areas, and you correctly identified that, one area leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another. The way for people to understand what they need to do is education, just understanding what you need, education about what you need, and then education about where you need to go. So there's heaps of resources on there. There's my book as well that the people can access parts of on the website. And it helps to guide you where you need to go. So take the test, because it identifies the legal risks, but there's also lots of other material on there as well that will help people to identify what those risks are and to be more proactive in the way that they deal with the law.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, as I was saying before, it's a pleasure. And if you're listening, you can grab that link and also Jeremy's LinkedIn URL in the comments section of this episode. Otherwise, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you have any questions or you'd like to be on the show, you can check out relevate.com.au and fill out the contact form. Otherwise, till next time, take care.